Welcome to Contemporary Issues Adult Sunday School class, which we call it school because sometimes like today, we will learn things as if we are in school. So we enjoy that especially in class. Welcome everyone in person and online. We are so pleased today to have Professor Peter Van Arsdale with us to talk about the Ark of the Covenant. He is our own Indiana Jones. Cultural anthropologist in the vein of Harrison Ford in the famous movie. So we are looking forward to learning today about all that the legends and the myths of the Ark have to tell us. Before we do that, I want to introduce folks who are here with Peter, his wife Kathy, and his son Mark. So nice to have you all with us here too. And our usual announcements, Zoomers, nice to have you here. Please mute yourself on the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. And we are recording this for future playback. And any other announcements, things going on around church that we want to plug, classes or events? Ash Wednesday, this Wednesday. Choir is singing, noon and 7 o'clock services. 7 o'clock, okay. Pancake supper for those who can. On Fat Tuesday, okay. Pancakes and ashes. Yes, Gene.
Oh, appreciate some of the humor you've been sending our way recently. Thank you.
Oh, surely, of course. We need a little humor in these trying times. Well,
That's for sure.
If maybe someday we will just take an hour and talk about things in the news. I wish we could do that today because there was so much in the news this week, but we can't for the time today. If we get started down that rabbit hole, we'll be all out. But let's pray for Ukraine and America and Europe and everyone in the whole world because we all need.
How do we pray?
How do we pray? We pray for peace.
There we go.
Okay, with that, let me introduce Professor Peter Van Arsdale, longtime St. Andrew member, professor of cultural anthropology around the world, and to probably most countries in the world, I would guess.
Well, 50.
50 countries?
Yeah. Well, there's 200 countries, so I've got a few more to visit still. Yeah.
That's still an impressive amount. So with that, he will have about a 45-minute presentation. Please hold your questions till after that, and then we will kick it around. But he's going to tell us about going to Ethiopia and the myths and legends with the Ark of the Covenant. Thank you for being here, Peter.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks, folks. It's great to see you. Thank you. It's so great to see so many of you I've known for so many years. I mean, there's Gail sitting there. There's Jim there. There's Kathy there. Jean, Mary. Jim over here, Linda, Steve, all of my friends from past and present. Thanks so much for being here. Every one of you, including the people I've just gotten to know recently, are terrific folks and appreciate your support and your friendship. So I'm going to immediately start since Steve has appropriately put a picture, not from 10,000 BC, but you know, a long time back. If we put that back on the screen, Steve, that Ark picture that you had there for just a moment. There it is on the right-hand side. And we'll just leave that there for a few moments. Can you get it full screen, Steve?
Peter, where did you teach?
I taught at the University of Denver, briefly early at the University of Colorado, and currently at Regis University.
Okay.
As a volunteer. As a volunteer, yeah.
Emeritus.
America.
Emeritus.
Emeritus.
So there's a very nice drawing, which is actually quite accurate based on what we think the Ark might have looked like. So I'm delighted that Steve researched and found that drawing. So we're just going to start with a description. Steve sent out a very nice memo that you probably saw where he included some of the descriptive details. We're just going to start with that. Then we'll go into history, myth, lore, fact, fiction. And then after that, you can hit me, and I don't know every answer, believe me. You can hit me with any question, concern, comment, idea you have when we get to the Q&A. I'll be wide open and we'll tackle it as best we can because it's an interesting and controversial topic. So the Ark known by Ethiopians as the tabot, T-A-B-O-T is how we would spell it, was a chest thought to be about 3 3/4 feet long, about 2 1/4 feet high, and about 2 1/4 feet deep. So just think of that. We're not talking about something very big. This, by this, by this, a modest-sized chest. This chest would have been made of acacia wood. And for any of you who have traveled or had the privilege, like I have, of working in East Africa, you'll see acacia trees everywhere. They're prominent, they're important. You'll see animals nibbling on the limbs and leaves, and you'll see people using the acacia wood. So acacia wood, they say, covered with gold. Now, if indeed this legend or fact, we're not sure, the gold wouldn't have been solid gold, it would have been gold leaf. Supposedly the ark contained the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, a pot of manna, which, by the way, may well have been, this is my speculation, a honey-based brew, because when I've been traveling in Ethiopia, I've learned how important honey is. And of course, this would have come from Egypt and the Sinai much earlier than before Ethiopia. But in that whole region, honey and honey-based brews are really important. So that might have been part of what the manna in the ark contained, as well as Aaron's rod. On the top is what's known as a mercy seat. And at each end, you can see in Steve's drawing, cherubs. Now, again, this is all speculation, of course. We do not have this to look at directly today. But when you think of that film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you remember, because most all of you have seen it, remember it because it was so vivid. The ark in that film is very much like the ark in this drawing. And from what we could speculate, very accurate. Almost nothing else in the Raiders of the Lost Ark film is accurate. Virtually nothing. So we put that aside, but it was a great film to watch. So I'm also referencing the important work of Graham Hancock, who in 1992 wrote the book, The Sign and the Seal. And he's covered many of the details that I'm going to cover today in great depth. I've met Graham Hancock. We've talked in Denver. And so I want to give him credit for his contributions. Now we're going to go back in time, my friends. We're going to go way back because we're going to talk about the ark and what it could have contained, the tablets of Moses, the tablets of the 10 Commandments. We have to say something about Moses. So I'm briefly taking us back in time. And by the way, just roughly, this could be about 12 or 1300 BC. We got to get in the right time frame here. We don't know the exact dates, but that's the ballpark time frame wise. Daniel Hayes, Professor Daniel Hayes, just wrote a very interesting article about Moses. And I just want to remind you of a few key things because they kind of set the stage for what happens later. Moses is an Egyptian name. It's not an Israeli or Hebrew or name of any sort like that. It's an Egyptian name. And his identity initially was as an Egyptian. He was not an Israelite. That Israelite connection, you might say, evolved or emerged much later after Midian. Moses had a violent streak. He married into a so-called pagan community. And we anthropologists, we actually don't like the word pagan because it implies something lesser of people's beliefs, and we don't ever demean anybody's beliefs. But they use the word pagan, that he early on married into a pagan community. I'm sorry?
Pejorative term.
Yeah, pejorative term, that's right. So we don't use, that's why I put it in quotation marks. And after encountering God in a burning bush, he departs Midian for Egypt, and then other things occur, of course, and the voyage to Mount Sinai, et cetera, et cetera. Moses' exodus with the people who accompanied him likely occurred, and there's 2 different pharaohs that might have been in charge at the time, but it likely occurred under Pharaoh Merneptah, Neptah. And that would put it again roughly around the time that I'm speaking of, 1250 BC, in that range.
No Ramses.
But Ramses II, predecessor of Merneptah, was likely the oppressor of the people who we call Israelites
Yul Brynner.
in, Eric's commenting on and on here. This is,
Yul Brynner.
oh yeah, well, you have a good memory for this, some of the details. Yeah, your printer. Yeah, really. Touche. So my friends, all of this has some, we think, basis in fact, or legend, or myth. All of this is wrapped into my presentation today. Myth, legend, and fact. And it's best to see them intertwined because they're all important. I think Adam and Eve was a myth. Does that make them less important? No, they're very important. I personally think they were mythological, not real people. Doesn't make them less important to our traditions. They're very important. When we get to the time of Moses and some of these other things where it's hard to decipher amongst myth, legend, and fact. So we do the best we can. Well, after the Ten Commandments and the Book of the Covenant, which complements the Ark of the Covenant, there were directions for building a wooden tabernacle. Now, you folks will find it very interesting that the notion of a tabernacle, as kind of a shelter, holy shelter, at least dates back to this time, and to a portable tabernacle. These people were on the move, or going to be on the move. A possible tabernacle, according to Haley's handbook, about 45 feet long, made of wood, made of curtains, with cloth. And when it was set up in honor of what was evolving here at this period of time in the 12th or 13th century BC, and having an ark built very shortly after the tablets were received by Moses, very shortly after, we don't know exactly how shortly, maybe 1 year, maybe 1 month, but shortly after, to house the tablets, the ark, the chest, a Holy of Holies idea emerged. And the Holy of Holies, still used today, suggests something interesting, that the tabernacle would have been erected site by site as the people traveled, camp by camp, voyage by voyage, portable tabernacle, set up, displaced, set up, displaced, set up, removed, set up again. And the Holy of Holies, containing the ark itself, was always just outside the tabernacle. Isn't that interesting? As opposed to inside the tabernacle where you think it might be placed.
Yeah.
Just outside in a special spot. So that's an interesting tidbit of history. Now, we have to say something about the route. And again, we're summarizing things, of course, but the route of the Exodus, which many of you have studied very carefully, and you know certainly as much about it or more than I do, but the somewhat, roughly speaking, 40 years route of the Exodus with the folks accompanying Moses and other leaders, of course, took them into the Sinai area. And I've seen maps that show them going this way and that way and up and down. I'm sure you've seen some of those maps too. Very interesting, all totally speculative. But here, me, as an anthropologist, and my wife knows how much I love numbers, because she and I always chat about numbers, because I'm always interested in numbers of things. I want to share a few numbers that I think are way out there in left field. For example, at one point, they suggested 600,000 males were traveling along or had been displaced. That's just males. 600,000? Impossible. At another point, someone or some interpreter said as many as 3 million people in the wilderness. No way, Jose. I don't know how many. There certainly was an exodus, I think, of people coming toward Canaan from Egypt. Let's give you my anthropological guess. 3,000 instead of 3 million. That's a big difference. But 3,000 people were 3,000 important people. So that's interesting, isn't it? Just how statistics are developed and exaggerated. Now, briefly, this portable tabernacle, which I thought you'd find so particularly interesting, continues along. They have at least 18 or 20 encampments over those years. I visited one of those places in the wilderness of Zin, Z-I-N. I was there with archaeologist Charles Page, had the privilege of seeing a site that possibly could have been one of the stopping points, you might say, intermediate in the Exodus voyage. So I was privileged to go to that spot out in the wilderness. Let me just tell you what that site looked like. You know the Book Cliffs near Grand Junction? You folks know those cliffs that stick right up.
Yeah.
It looked just like that, except the narrower valley. It looked just like that. Interesting place, fascinating. So the people have traveled on, eventually on to Jericho. And it said even that at Jericho, the ark was there at the destruction of Jericho. Maybe the ark in some way contributed to the successes of people because of its power. Now, this is interesting also. The ark is said, and I believe there could be some factualization to this, to have been covered by a kaporet, K-A-P-O-R-E-T. And that is a cloth, a special thick, holy cloth that would be placed over the ark while it was being transported, probably by bearers. You know how people often transport things exactly by bearers and whatnot, or by, animals also. It wouldn't have been all that heavy because, as you can see, it's not all that big. This kaporet was to keep the power of the ark enclosed. It was said that when the cloth was removed, occasionally it was, the power of the ark was so great that you'd be struck dead if you got too close. And it's said that 2 sons of Aaron were struck dead when they got too close. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
I can't tell you whether that's fact or fiction, but the power, the notion of the power is what's important about this. Now, eventually, the ark, after about 250 years, this is the Exodus and beyond the Exodus, makes it to Jerusalem, early Jerusalem, the city of David. Now we're roughly, I'm just rounding off, 1000 BC. Remember, I mentioned that Exodus could have been starting about 1250 BC. So for 250 years, presumably, the ark is being transported, taken camp to camp, put up, taken down, following the tabernacle, etc. That's fascinating, isn't it? If that amount of time was in fact correct. And it was then ensconced in the temple, the first temple in Jerusalem, around that time, the time of King David, and around the time of his son, who was Solomon, exactly, King Solomon. So that's where the next increasingly fascinating part of this story, you can tell I'm fascinated by the entire story, where the next fascinating part of the story occurs. At about this time, the time of King Solomon, which now places us around 1000 or maybe 950 BC, and he's now ensconced following David as the king of that region of Judah / near Israel / Judah. Those Judah-Israel evolution was occurring, of course, by name and landscape. As the first kings in the Bible, 1 Kings chapter 10 tells us the Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon. One chapter, I just reread it again last night to be sure I had the latest details from 3,000 years ago. Says, Brad, I'm summarizing some of the high points. It's just, again, one chapter. You may enjoy reading it. It's very interesting. That the Queen of Sheba came from the south, came to Jerusalem, was entirely impressed by King Solomon, complimented his wealth and his wisdom, and said something, I'm paraphrasing, your wives are so lucky. Yeah, I'm just paraphrasing here, but anyway, that's the way it was in those days. And because of her impression and her own wealth, having come from the south, and we're going to say more about that, it's said in the Bible, she gave him 5 tons of gold and more spices than he'd ever received. Now, again, Kathy, my dear wife, knows me in numbers. 5 tons of gold? Impossible. Maybe we could say 5 pounds of gold. You know how hard it is to process gold, especially in that era when you didn't have the kind of equipment we have now? There's no way that she could have transported or given him 5 tons of gold. But in any event, the numbers in the Bible are pretty wild, in my opinion, but interesting. So she left, and after that, after her impressive visit, left and returned to her land. So now the Ethiopian legendary perspective, my friends, starts to kick in, and it is so fascinating. I refer in part to an ancient text called the Kebra Nagast, which was printed, distributed maybe 700 years ago, way after, but that has legends and narratives from the Ethiopian perspective of history. And other reports, and here's the story then, that while the ark was ensconced in the first temple under Solomon, roughly about 950 BC, visiting, maybe 930 BC, was a man named Menelik, Menelik. And Menelik was the illegitimate son, you guessed it, of Solomon and Sheba. There's just only one thing he's never mentioned in the Bible or in any of those early texts on that side, but he's mentioned in early Ethiopian recreations and narratives. Isn't that fascinating? Menelik, the illegitimate but prized son of Solomon and Sheba. So Menelik has returned as a young man. He'd been born when his mom, the Queen of Sheba, had returned down south, been born there, and later returned. And for one reason or another, and under the aid of Zadok, Kathy, remind me, you're our musical expert. What's that one, Zadok?
The priest.
Well, that was quite nice. Excellent.
The priest.
Yes, Kathy knows her music. Exactly, that famous piece. Thank you, Kathy. Zadok the priest and his son,
It's in the crown.
they might have stolen the ark at that very time. This is still like 930 BC. It hasn't been in the first temple very long. They steal the ark because they're aided by Zadok and his highfalutin cadre of powerful people. And we're not sure why would they do that. But remember, Menelik is a guy who's come from the south. And now I'm going to add a little bit more about this south part. The south meaning Yemen or northeast, what we now think of as Ethiopia. Think of the map. Yemen is just across the strait from northeast Ethiopia.
Oh, yeah.
The land of Sheba or Saba. So, very interesting. So, according to the legends now, here's what unfolds. Menelik, Zadok's son, perhaps continuing on to other cadres, take the ark south, which means you'll have your maps here well in mind because my friend Mark is going to pass out some of them. Now would be a good time, Mark. Mark is going to share with you 4 copies of the article that was published about my work there 30 years ago. So please don't, please don't, he's going to circulate, you don't have time to look at it. Please don't open the paper more than what Mark has just done because it's very fragile paper. But I hope you enjoy looking at these pictures as we're now going to be talking. And we'll circulate them around. We have 4 copies. Again, please don't go beyond and open the paper this way. It might fall apart. I hope you enjoy looking at this because you'll see a small color diagram that shows some of the possible journeys of the ark once it was stolen. You'll see them right here in the newspaper. So I want to alert you, they did a kind of a color misprint. Remember, this is back in the old days before there was a printing press 31 years ago. There's a bunch of blue regions shown on the map. disregard the blue regions. That's just a color misprint. When you look at it, just look at the map and look at the routes, the possible routes from the Jerusalem area south to Ethiopia on the small map. And you'll also be looking at a picture of the place where they say that they have the ark today. And you'll be looking at a small photo of the man I met, who was the guardian of the ark. So I hope you'll find this very interesting. I know you will, and it'll complement what I'm now going to be talking about. So I hope with the 4 copies that everybody will eventually have a chance to take a peek. Thank you so much. By the probable route, Jerusalem, then over to the Nile, south of Cairo, and up, meaning south, 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 up the Nile, south, south, south on the Nile, to possibly the Atbara River, which is a branch of the Nile that runs toward Ethiopia, or possibly further down the Blue Nile. When it gets to Khartoum, the Nile has the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile comes into the Nile from Ethiopia. The White Nile comes from down further south near Uganda and whatnot. By whatever route, whether it was more direct into northern Ethiopia via the Atbara, or a little further south, or even possibly by the Red Sea, coming down directly by the Red Sea, which would take it right near northern Ethiopia. Over time, it is said that the ark was transported secretly all along that way. This is hundreds of miles. How long? We have absolutely no idea how long it would have taken, because they likely would have stopped many times, and the early cadres would have come and gone and died, and new cadres would have been recruited and carried on. Remember, we're talking about something, if the theft occurred, as they say, in about 930 BC, and we're up to today, that's almost 3,000 years we're talking about here. How do we account for all that time? It seems unfathomable. Now, in other words, by one route or another, the ark made it, they say, to the town of Aksum, A-X-U-M, in northern Ethiopia, where I've been on three different occasions over the last 31 years since I first visited and was reported in the Denver Post. So I want to now, with my good friend Steve's help, show you my first set of slides. And these will show you the context that the ark is being brought into. Because these slides, starting with, we'll get it right there. Perfect, Steve. And can you even expand it further? That's good enough. If it's like that, that's fine.
Would it help to turn the light off?
Oh, good. That looks, I know, that's wonderful. Thank you, Steve. You'll be able to see everything very well. Yeah, very well. Into this rocky and mountainous environment right here in northern Ethiopia, I want to show you the early churches that had evolved under Christian influence, dating back. Well, the first missionaries you need to know arrived in Ethiopia, what we now call Ethiopia. It's, by the way, in history also been called Kush, Zazamonk, Abyssinia. Those are all different names for Ethiopia. The first Syrian Christian missionaries got there in the 4th century. For that area, that's really early, the 4th century. And so shortly thereafter, churches were developed. And they're the most amazing churches in the northern part, because most are carved out of the rock walls, as opposed to being built brick by brick or stone by stone.
Wow.
So I'm going to show you with these nice slides. I think they're nice slides. I took them. Okay, Steve, yeah, we'll just kind of keep.
That one? Okay. Just a second.
Yeah, let's go back to this. We'll just go through in a nice sequence. Yeah.
So the first one,
Now we need to go to that one, yeah. And hopefully we can just rotate from slide to slide. Perfect, that's just perfect. We'll just go slowly from slide to slide.
Okay.
Look at the terrific art. This is a classic art form, Christian art form of early artists in the Tigray, that is the northern region of Ethiopia. Isn't that fantastic? You've probably seen some of that. It's so well known and famous. Terrific as they portray the saints and the others of that era. Next pictures, please, Steve. Yeah, just get the, keep going, that perfect. And in some of these churches, this is a rarity. This one is built out of stone separately. Next picture, please. But most have featured in caves or in cave-like environments cut into the stone or the rock walls. Pictures like this that are painted with this style. They're absolutely most amazing. Honestly, I'm not an expert on art of any sort, but of religious art, this is the most amazing religious art I personally have ever seen. Next, please, Steve. And that's upside down, but that's okay. Could we rotate, or is that too difficult?
Looking for the rotate. It was okay when we saved it, but.
Yeah, we saved it in a rotated fashion.
Try more.
Well, I don't want to.
Top tab more.
We saved it in a proper fashion earlier this week, but
Sorry, it's okay.
it's okay. No, it's fine. Just turn your heads upside down. Yeah.
Next one.
That's one of those rock churches. You can see how it's carved, beautiful arches, a small cloth representing the entryway, the green cloth, and you very archaic. You can see how old this is. I mean, this particular church is probably 1,300 years old. Next, please, Steve. And some of them are right into these. There's one right in that rock wall above that small village that you see here. There's one right in that rock wall. I walked right in. I mean, it was unbelievable how the people carved these out of stone inside cliff sides and all. Next, please, Steve. And each one is guarded by an important guardian priest, like this gentleman who I met, and who welcomes you and uses his censer to sprinkle incense and whatnot and to guide you in. We're using a translator. I don't speak that Tigrinya language, so we're using a translator describing some of the artifacts and the beautiful paintings. Next, please, Steve. But some are ominous. Some are ominous. I took this picture of these people hanging and beating this person. Well, that's represented in early Christian art too. Some type of a villain. There he is, meeting his demise. Next, please, Steve.
That was it.
Okay, so thank you. That's perfect. We can just even leave that picture there for a second, or you can even move toward the other pictures in a few minutes. Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be good. So that's the context where it said the ark was brought. Well, you can see why that would be an important context, because it had all this religious oomph already underway. This early Christian oomph, is that a technical term? I don't know. But there was a lot of clout there, and that was a powerful area. Because I'll tell you one last thing. It was so respectful that even today, I'm sorry, ladies, because you can guess there's a high degree of patriarchy in this area. The reason I say I'm sorry is because there are certain places that women cannot visit in this region that I've just shown you. Sadly. In one place, the most amazing, it was featured once in a James Bond film. My colleague Sky Hailug and I, who's a man from Ethiopia, he and I were hauled up on a rope, one strand rope, 50 feet, straight up a cliff into a little doorway. Every second I was thinking, I hope I don't fall. I hope I don't fall. It was very scary. Straight up 50 feet. And we entered the little doorway, and there on the top of that hill, it was really a mesa, you might say, an impenetrable mesa. That's why you had to go up, be hauled up by the men up above by hand. And on the top was a beautiful monastery dating to the 6th century, where we saw the valuable manuscripts that were reserved. The monks showed us, and they pointed out only male and male things can come to the top of this particular holy site. We said, what about a rooster? No, you can't bring a rooster up here. It's a male. You can only bring female chickens for food. We said, what about a boar, for food, or pigs, or no, nothing that's male can come up here. Animal or human, only male, only male, nothing female from, broadly speaking, from the animal world, including the human world. No female connections. Whoa, I mean, the whole thing was just amazing. And
Why don't you
then
go in costume?
you never make it, Linda, because these guys are so careful. They're very courteous.
Afraid of women.
They pat you down, that's what happens.
Well, they're. So, isn't it amazing? What an amazing area it was. I was privileged to be there, and privileged because when I came down that rope, it was just as scary as going up the rope. And a young man came down the rope with me, grabbing me and helping me get to the bottom of the cliff. I'm telling you, it was something else. So that area then is said to accompany what I'm now going to show you in the next set of slides, thanks to Steve. I'm going to show you the landscape now, the arc landscape. You've seen now the historic church landscape in the cliffs. We're now going to show, yeah, that's perfect, Steve, right there. You've got the right photos on the screen. Starting with that one. Perfect. Well, that's quite amazing. You happen to notice me and several other people standing on Denver Street.
Yeah.
Why in the world, and that is Denver, Colorado Street, not some other Denver. Why in the world? Because I had the privilege with my colleagues in that picture of starting the Denver Oxum sister city. And so this city of Oxum, where it's said that the Ark rests, we had the privilege of arranging that, setting it up, and they said, in honor of you, we're naming our main street, or one of the two main streets, Denver Street. Isn't that unbelievable? I'm telling you, we were so honored, we're blown away. Blown away. Next, please, Steve. Now, in this town of Oxum rise amazing stela, granite stela. The two you're looking at there are 50 and 60 feet tall, respectively. And in the foreground, you see a broken series of stones. That broken series in the foreground, it's, again, the numbers. Kathy will always enjoy listening to the numbers. That stela was 100 feet tall from a single piece of granite and weighed 500 tons. And they tried to erect it in this town 1,800 years ago. You can see they succeeded in erecting the somewhat taller, still huge stela. Those stela there are over 100 tons each. The 500 ton was too much, and it collapsed. They had hauled that probably by elephants. There are no elephants there now. Probably by how many elephants? 20, 30, 50? From a quarry that I visited 3 miles away. How do people do these things? We have engineers in this room will be as amazed as I am, and I'm not an engineer. And they got it that far, and I talked to a man, and I said, well, we're sorry about the failure of the one that collapsed 1,800 years ago, but how did you raise the ones that you succeeded? He said, in those days, we had brilliant engineers, and we had angels. The angels and engineers worked together, and they raised the stela. That's your answer, sir.
They were probably sled.
Okay, angels and engineers. What do you think of that? Isn't this area amazing? You can see why it's one of the most amazing areas in the world. Now, let's go back. We missed a couple there. Yeah, we've gone too far.
Whoops,
Go back.
sorry,
back,
and
back, back. See where it goes.
Yeah, we need to go right there. The third picture, Steve. 0912. Thank you, right there.
No, third.
Next
hang on
picture.
a second.
It's okay.
Okay.
No, don't worry. This near Aksum, this same town in northern Ethiopia, is the so-called Queen of Sheba Palace. Now, we're not sure, in fact, if it is, but they say it is. If that's in fact the case, then it's further evidence that there was a power there before the ark ever got there, and that the ark was brought there in part to represent the Queen of Sheba and Menelik, her son, Solomon's illegitimate son, from eon before. Well, evidence, circumstantial evidence. Now, next, please, Steve. Now, the ceremonies are amazing that are held in this area in respect for where they think that the ark is here, and for the many Christian Orthodox Coptic type, but it's not Egyptian Coptic, it's kind of in the Ethiopian Coptic Christian tradition. Look at the hundreds of people gathered in their beautiful white gowns, men and women, for the Timkat, Timkat, for the Timkat ceremony, which is an important, extremely important religious celebration, pilgrimage, and whatnot to these sites, to these stela, to the home, purported home of the ark. Next, please. And in the St. Mary of Zion Church, which is right across from the stela you just saw, worshipers come. You can see that it's a beautifully arranged church. There's a lady bringing flowers. Next, please, Steve. Beautiful artwork. This gentleman showed me some of his favorite artwork within that church. You can see it again with that classic tradition. Next, please. Beautiful book. This is a huge book. Look at the colors these people use. Isn't it phenomenal?
Right.
This book that you're looking at is 1,000 years old. Look at how well preserved it is. Of course, you can't touch it or anything, but oh, it's amazing. Next, please, Steve. And now we are to the chapel that at that time, which you saw in the pictures that I circulated thanks to Mark, that chapel which you saw a young man with 3 crowns, right?
Right.
That's that chapel right here behind a fence. And in the distance in that picture, you saw a priest peeking out, didn't you? In the back of the door, that door. That's the guardian priest who I had the privilege of meeting and chatting with using an interpreter. And he said to many who've asked, behind that door, I'm guarding the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh,
I'm guarding the tablet. Here it is in Aksum, Ethiopia. It's behind that door, and I'm guarding it. And when I die, because I can't leave, he has to be there 24/7 until he dies. The next senior guardian priest will take my place. And later, in a later one of my visits, I met the next guardian priest, because this gentleman you saw pictured in the small photo, Father Tesfamariam, Father Hope. I give a loose translation to his name. Wasn't that a great name? Father Hope had died. I'm telling you, it touches my heart to just think of these things. Yeah, Mark is showing in the photo there. Now, the next picture will be good, please, Steve. Here's the St. Mary of Zion Church next to that small chapel that is purported to house the ark. And it's a beautiful church. The celebrants and pilgrims come there at least twice a year. And many tourists visit. We certainly are welcome. Tourists are welcome. Next, please, Steve. And when we were there the last time, they were building a new sanctuary or mini chapel. Here it is, under construction, to house the ark. And we were somewhat wondering, because the other one, as you saw, looked perfect. But they said, no, it's time That other chapel's been in existence for centuries. We want to build a new one. And by coincidence, we just happened to be there. This is just about 8 years ago now, when the new one was being constructed. So that was fascinating. And interestingly, this guardian priest was very shy. The other gentleman who I first met was very open. This guardian priest really did not want to chat. Okay, well, people are different. People are different. Next, please. Nearby, I want to show you the landscape. Again, you've seen the mountains before. Here's one of the guardhouses. Here's a nice young boy that I met. And the guardhouse is not far from the Stella and from the chapel on the edge of town. This is an important town. Now, here we have to be inferential, my friends. And again, remember, you're talking to a social scientist who is interested in science, who does not have all the answers to science, but who's interested and wants to be cautious. People have often asked me, knowing that I've been there, I've studied this and investigated, did the priest allow you to look at the ark? No, no, and no. He doesn't let anybody beyond that door. Nobody goes beyond that door. So what's behind the door? We can only infer, based on their legend, that it's a part of the ark, or a part of the tablets that were in the ark, or it's part of the manna, or Aaron's rod, or one or more of these things, or replicas. All of those are possibilities. But they say, we got something behind that door, and we'll tell you it's the ark. Now, here's then my scientific view to support this possible Ethiopian version. Oh, good, just right on time, because then we'll be able to open up for questions. The Kebra Nagast narrative that I mentioned to you from that 700-year-old book mentions these things. Well, no reason to think it's not a reputable book, even though it was written over 1,000 years after the ark was apparently stolen. Secondly, I mentioned the early Christian missionaries. This is an area that is richly Christian and has that support structure, which could have accommodated the receipt of the ark. And the Aksum town was a part of the Aksum Empire, the strongest empire in that part of Ethiopia nearly 2,000 years ago. It dwindled and was pretty well out. I'm going to say roughly by about 1,600 years ago. But for several hundred years, that empire was the most powerful in that area. Next, I showed you, I'm just giving you now the inferential support possibilities. I showed you the Queen of Sheba palace. Maybe. They're not sure. They don't have not a single artifact from that palace that has anything to do with the name Queen of Sheba. Zero. But people say it could have been her local palace. Now, next, and this is one of the most recent, very interesting. A language spoken in Yemen, there's some attenuated version still today, is the Sabaean language, Sabaean. And the Sabaean language was probably the language spoken by the Queen of Sheba. In 2012, in Jerusalem, a small potsherd, partial potsherd was discovered with 7 letters on it, which appeared to be Sabaean, appear to date to the time of the King Solomon, and refer, as interpreted by just 7 letters, to an aromatic substance used from the south near Yemen to the north near Jerusalem. Interesting inference, eh? That there could have been those connections. Yep, fascinating. And the final inference from the Bible, as I mentioned, 1 Kings 10, the visit of the Queen of Sheba. Doesn't say anything about illicit son. It doesn't say anything about Menelik, but it certainly says she was there and was really impressed. So, my friends, those are some of the inferences that allow us to suggest it might be there. The final thing I'm going to say, and then ask me anything at all, is that in the same region, as some of you recall, starting in 2020, just 4.5 years ago, November 2020, a civil war broke out among Central Federated Troops of Ethiopia. Militia and others from the Tigray region of the north, who had often been at odds with the central government, but at one point had also been in charge of the central government, aided by, I can only call them, vicious Eritrean troops who came across the border under one of the world's most ominous dictators, who you may not have heard of, Isaias Afwerki, Afwerki. Isaias Afwerki is one of the world's absolutely most dominant and horrific dictators for the small nation of Eritrea, which borders Tigray and is not far from this town of Aksum. During that war, it was a tragic report when I got it one day from one of my friends, Ethiopian friends, that near that church, near that sanctuary, near the place where they think the ark might be, 400 Aksum citizens were slaughtered in one day, including children and priests and women. Unbelievable. A part of a larger civil war that played out for 2 years in that region. They instituted a scorched earth campaign, refugees by the thousands, livestock slaughtered, cropland desiccated, so that people couldn't easily rebound. And still today, you can guess, even though the war technically ended in 2022, the people are still trying to rebound, including friends of Kathy's and mine who live there. Thank you.
So, Peter, why did they say in Oxum why they wouldn't let you see the ark in the chapel?
It's too powerful.
It's too powerful.
Too powerful.
It would kill anybody that looked at
Yeah,
it.
and they say inside that chapel, it's still covered by the capote,
Okay,
the super cloth.
okay.
It's still covered. So,
Tell what happened in the war.
oh yes, thank you, Kathy. So in the war, about the time that sadly, those 400 people were massacred. And about the same time, sadly, that another village nearby where we worked, I was wondering whether to share this with you or not, but I'm going to. During that same time, in the nearby village or town of Idaga Arbi, the health clinic that we helped with this church's donations through Project Cure. You folks know Project Cure, right? Oh, yeah. And a container that we sent, Robin's raising his hand, he knows Project Cure. Through a giant container that we sent, as they always send, we raised $24,000, half of which came from the good people of this church. We got it to the hospital, more of a kind of a clinic hospital, not a full-fledged hospital, a clinic hospital in that town. During the war, that hospital was ravaged. All of our donations were destroyed. And the hospital, actually very hard for me to say, the hospital was burned to the ground. And our church's donations were lost or stolen by the invading soldiers, whatever. I'm sorry to have to share. It brings tears to my eyes to share that, especially because I'm so fond of the church here, the good people that help so much in this church. Did you want me to say a second thing too, Kathy?
About the ark.
Yes, okay. So I checked twice now since, and we think that that new chapel that was being constructed that you saw was left intact by the marauders. That's the only blessing news I can share.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Colleen was first, and then we'll go to the back.
I'm just curious if the Pope had any curiosity to want to see the Ten Commandments? Do you
The
know?
Pope?
The Catholic Pope.
Oh, how would he have seen the Ten Commandments?
No, if he ever went there,
Oh, you mean if the Pope ever visited here?
visited.
No, because it's really not in that Catholic tradition. It's in a Coptic Christian tradition, which is not under the Pope's domain.
Gotcha.
So thank you for asking. That's a good question. you would think it'd be a great place for him to visit if he's interested in Christianity, but no,
And the Ten Commandments.
yeah,
I mean,
but no, he has not visited because it's in a different subdivision of the religion. Good question,
Okay,
good
Laura
question.
Lee,
I'm interested to know, has anyone ever tried to repatriate the Ark of the Covenant? In other words, back to Jerusalem?
Yeah. Several have talked about it. No one has, as far as we know, no one has tried. Because of course, normally, one of the other things is, you can guess, some people in Jerusalem don't think it ever made it to Ethiopia. They think, and I can see this, that it probably disappeared about the time of the Second Temple.
Oh, interesting.
Yep, and that was never heard from again. So, very good question. All these are good questions.
do scholars have a consensus on what they think?
No, absolutely no consensus. Absolutely no consensus.
Okay, okay. Alice.
There's a lady that sits next to me in choir, her name's Marilyn. Her son is over there right now.
In Ethiopia?
Ethiopia,
Oh.
the embassy. USAID is cutting them out. So I just, a little bit of current history.
Yes,
going
thank you.
on.
Well, Steve had wondered whether I should say this, but since you brought up USAID, I will say it because it fits in with what you just very powerfully said. I worked once for USAID. I was chief of party in El Salvador on a water project for small farm irrigation. I'll tell you, USAID is one of the best organizations I ever worked for. I'll guarantee you. And on that contract we had, we did not waste one dime. And we accomplished all of our goals under USAID's fine leadership. Thank you for mentioning this.
He's
Wanted
hoping
to,
to get home
yes,
right now. He's got a family and.
well, I know, it's a tragedy. Yeah, but I was saying, wondering whether I should say it, but I did want to thank you, Steve, to give me a chance to say. Oh, of course, Eric.
In that article that we passed around, I noticed that it said something, I couldn't read more than a paragraph, I had to pass it on. But it said something about it was moved to this location during the Babylonian exile, is that right?
That would be not right. It's a speculation,
Okay.
but again, think of when the Babylonian exile was, at that period.
In the article.
Yes, several hundred.
It said 457.
Yes, BC and all, yes.
Yeah.
That would have then not been under Menelik, of course, because Menelik would have been about 930 BC.
Okay.
So but there are different speculations. And even once it got to Aksum, some people speculate that they took it out of Aksum a few times when Aksum was being attacked historically, including under the ominous, ladies, be ready, Queen Gudit, one of the most ominous queens of Ethiopian history. So, sorry, I just had to interject that. All the ladies I know are lovely. I read that she was not lovely. So, really. So, other questions, comments, critiques?
Well, there's another view that it's underneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
That is correct.
Still to this day,
Yes, I read the article by the gentleman who,
hidden way down.
that's right. I read that same article, Steve.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. I read that.
Christine has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There was a picture of the new building that they.
Yeah, the new building, yes.
Now, is that been finished or?
We think it's finished and was not destroyed in the Civil War.
So my next question is, then how are they going to try to move the Ark of the Covenant over there without anyone?
Yes,
seeing it?
from the old chapel to the new chapel, even though they're only 100 yards apart.
Are they gonna do it on cover of night?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that is an excellent point. Under the cover of night, with the basically the only guy who really gets to look at it being the guardian monk. Isn't that something? We hope.
Otherwise, your face will melt off like in the movie.
Yeah, the movie.
Right in the movie. Yes, ma'am, go right ahead.
Some government warehouse.
Yeah, government warehouse.
Was.
Sorry.
What the motivation actually was for Menelik to actually steal this?
Yeah, that's only speculation, but you're asking an excellent question. We think the speculation, and going back to the Keber Nagas, that document I mentioned, was because of, yes, sure, he was beholden to his father, his illegitimate father, King Solomon, but he was much more beholden to his mother, the Queen of Sheba. And after all, he grew up purportedly in the Yemen, northern Ethiopia area. one side or another of the Red Sea. And so he was much more beholden to his mother and did this in part in honor of his mother. This is a speculation only.
Sure, his mom wanted it.
And his mom probably said, go get it, man. Go get it. Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Try and do what our mother, Vicky said she needed a jewelry box. Any more questions? We've got about a minute or two left.
Yeah, is there gold in Fort Knox?
Is there gold in Fort Knox?
Yeah.
I've got a quick question. 40 years, they supposedly were in the desert and carried the ark before them. 40, the number 40 in the Old Testament, isn't it a general term
Yes.
for a long time?
Yes, yes.
Because Jesus stayed 40 days in the
Yep.
wilderness
Yep.
and the Israelites were 40 years. So it could have been any long period of time. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a placeholder,
A placeholder.
not an accurate number.
Rain for 40 days and nights.
Yeah,
It rained
well
for 40
stated,
days
Eric.
and nights.
Well
Yes,
stated.
Yes, so.
Well, I'm delighted to see all of you good folks. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week. Bye, Susan.